There's one mistake nearly every single racing driver makes, which is braking too early. It's very common and unfortunately it will cost you so much lap time, even up to 2-3 tenths of a second. Sometimes even more if you're in tracks like Sano or Franciacorta or Zuera, where there's lots of heavy braking zone, that can be even up to 4 or 5 tenths. That can really be the difference between winning a race and not even qualifying for the final. Setting pole position or not even qualifying for the top 40. It's that fierce, especially in Europe. WSK races, Champions of the Future, CIK, FIA, those races are brutal. If you're not on the point, you are not gonna be even in the final. So it's very, very important to nail your braking points. And how you do that? Well, obviously you want to rely on feeling. You want to brake later and later and later, but you never really know exactly how you compare against your teammates or how you compare against the other drivers. Well, of course, you can only compare yourself against teammates. I mean, I would say in terms of data, you can't compare against the others. You can only basically rely on videos in order to guess where they're braking. But if you have strong teammates, you can really tell whether they're braking. If they're braking a couple of meters earlier or a couple of meters later, which is what you don't want to. But in this case, if they do, it's good because you have an idea where they are braking, so you know that next time around you want to brake 2 meters later, and ideally even 3 meters later, because if the track gets faster, you want to break where they break, but even later, because you know that once you're going to download the data, you see that they have pushed forward a breaking point, which is very important, by the way. As the track changes, you want to change following the track. You don't want to basically rely on your teammates' previous session. So this is a skill you have to develop. Yes, looking at data is key. This is going to help you a lot, but you need to also develop the feeling of know you're on the limit. Like, you need to break so late and over push so that you can then bring it slightly backwards. You have to use, in order to brake late, you need to maximally attack. You need to use every single every single bit of performance from your braking. So you need to be as late as possible, holding the brakes and trying to decelerate and take the speed down as quickly as possible. But obviously, it depends on your braking system. It depends on your chassis. It depends on the grip level from your tires, tire pressures, but most important, tire wear, if they're new or not. So it depends on many factors, but at least knowing that where you're braking right now and what you need to do in order to brake later is key. So you want to develop the feeling of like, oh, I can't brake any later than that. Like, oh, I'm going to miss the corner. Oh, I'm going to miss the corner. Oh, I'm going to miss the corner. When you have that feeling, oh, I'm going to miss the corner, that's probably when you have braked the latest. You can still try to brake 1 meter later next time, and you probably still be able to make the apex. Then probably that is the point where you should brake, and then you have to repeat it every time. That's not easy. That's why you need to have a braking point, a reference, right? And ideally you need to push it forward. I mean, in cars it's much easier to have a braking point reference because you basically have the 50 meters board, the 100 meters board, 150 meters board. You can even rely on some references like the curbs on the left, which you can do basically too in carts. You can use the curbs on like your entry curbs when if it's a right-hander corner, you basically have the curb on the left or like where you want to use it, for example, if you want to use it or not, but you know exactly where, if it's at the beginning of the curve, if it's at the end of the curve, if it's at the middle of the curve, that's basically your braking point, I would say. There's not many other braking points in go-kart. You have to rely more on feeling, which is something you have to develop. All right, it's very important, but you want to arrive to a point where you're so late in the brakes that you're like, wow, I can't brake any later. If you always feel like, oh, I think I could have braked later. I think I could have braked later. Then there's huge amount of distance you can brake. Like if you even think, oh, I could have braked later, then it means there's like 4 or 5 meters, and 4 or 5 meters in karting is huge. 4 or 5 meters in cars is a lot, but it's not so much because you arrive at higher speeds. 10 meters in car, it's like probably 2 meters in go-kart, I would say. So 4 or 5 meters in karts. Sometimes I find even up to 10 meters. Like when some of my drivers are sleeping, I call them sleeping. The first few sessions of the weekend, they are riding, especially if it's a new circuit, they're braking like 12 meters earlier, 15 meters earlier. It's like they're coasting, they're not using the brakes. And I'm like, what is going on? I mean, you're not even pushing. No, but like, you don't have to do that. Like, I want basically from my drivers, and I think you should do it too. And also from myself, when I go on the track, I want to make the opposite mistake if I have to make a mistake, which we all do, by the way. I want to be so late on the brakes that I'll miss the apex. But that's great because, I mean, it's going to tell you, okay, you brake a bit too late. Now, next time you want to brake in the same way, same maximum effort, but you want to brake a little bit earlier. So you'll be able to get back, to the optimal brake. It's a different way. There's someone who brakes early and then brakes later and later to get to the perfect point, In car, like, but there's other ways like I prefer, which is probably more difficult to do. You need to have more guts for that, I would say. You need to be like, you can push a little bit late, like you can be a little bit beyond the limit and then bring it back so that you can go towards the limit. Right? It's different philosophy. In go-karts you can do it. In karts, in some tracks you can't really. Like if it's like a street circuit, I've been to a few street circuits like Macau. I've been to Po. I wasn't ever able to drive in Macau, unfortunately. Never really got to drive there. Sorry, not in Macau, in Monaco. I drove in Macau and I drove in Po. I even won one time in Po in Formula 3. It was really good race. But I know what it means to drive in cars, and you can't really do that thing. Like you can't over brake, over push, and then bring it backwards. And to be honest, it was a shame I couldn't, because obviously if you just brake a bit too late, you lock out the tires, you're in the wall. That's it. You can't try again. You can't play a replay button on your PlayStation with like flashbacks. You can't do that, and basically you get the chance to try again. No, you're in the wall, it's expensive, and you have to wait for the next session. Where in cars, you don't have this issue. I mean, that I know, we don't have any street circuits in Europe. There's Vegas, SCUSA race, but none that I know in Europe. But even if there was, like, you can still brake late or an overblade, you can still bring it back. You won't have as big of a damage as you get in cars. But anyways, I don't want to digress. My point being is that you want to be super late, super hard, two different approaches. In my opinion, if you develop the approach that you overbrake, like you brake too late. But remember, when I'm talking about this, I'm always referring to overbraking, but with the highest amount of pressure that your go-kart allows in terms of brakes system, in terms of grip level on the track. Grip level on the track, and obviously grip level from the tires. Obviously, if you have a new tires, you'll be able to brake a little later than if you have finished tires. That's obvious, So yeah, my point being is that you want to obviously approach this as maximum intensity, because listen to this. This is very important what I'm about to say. If you brake early and then you release the brakes, you would never find the right brake, the right point. You will never find the right braking spot, because you're not using 100% brake capacity. You're using like 60% brake capacity. Maybe at the beginning it's 100, but then you go down to like 20, so in average 60. So that's not good. I don't want to see braking and then coming off like early on. You have to hold the brakes until like, I have to hold it, and then you just hold them, like you come off when you are into the corner, and you basically have to just roll that last bit of time before you get on the gas. I hope you get my point. There's always a little bit of rolling time, like a tiny bit, but obviously if it becomes too much, it's because you brake too early, and that should never happen. And if you have this is a really bad habit, by the way. If you have this habit of braking hard and just coming off right away and just rolling into the corner, that's not gonna work. The only times it can work is if you have tracks with high-speed corners and there's a lot of grip build up, like let's say La Conca, where you want to roll a lot of speed rather than like braking that like a little bit later everywhere. That can work because you want to roll a lot of speed. I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm saying it can work. But it's never going to work in low grip conditions. It's never going to work in twisty circuits where you have to have a lot of braking spots with like 180 degrees corners where you have to basically like hairpins. It's never going to work there. So remember that. You want to approach your braking with a mindset of maximum pressure, that you're locking up the tires initially. And then you just obviously hold them, and then obviously you have to still hold them even if you're not maybe locking for the whole corner. Again, it depends from different categories, grip level. I can't just say one rule for all the different categories, for all the different tires. But you typically want to maybe maximum brake pressure, and then you adjust your braking point. But as I said, I still do this day when I'm driving with my KZ. I want to be super late, ideally missing the apex the first times, and then I'm able to bring slightly backwards. Because it's so much easier to make the mistake of never being on the limit even once the whole day. Because like if you never try to go beyond the limit, you probably try to, if you're doing the opposite, which is like trying to get closer to the limit every lap, you may never have gotten once on the limit. If you try instead to go past the limit and then you just bring it backwards, I think it's way easier and it's way faster to get the proper braking point. And by the way, it's not just one corner. We have multiple corners obviously in a circuit. We're not racing at Indianapolis where you have two corners basically, if you can call them corners. It's like you have multiple corners, so you have to apply this method for multiple corners. So I would rather get them earlier to my braking points than later. Okay, so the earlier I do it, and for me the way to do it is just over brake, to brake later and just over push. and then just bring it backwards. All right. But to be honest, like if it's a new track, it may take you a little bit more time. If it's a track you've been to, you will have to just adjust yourself based on the track conditions, on the grip conditions of your cart. So you have to, it's easier, it's faster to find the braking points, okay? But you still want to remember these things. I think they're very, very important. And you'll find a lap time like that, and make sure you look at video, you look at your data, and try to compare to see where you're braking. And if your go-kart doesn't allow you to brake late, you know, and there's the track conditions are quick because the others are able to do that, then you need to make sure you look around the go-kart what is wrong. Maybe your braking system isn't right. I mean, like maybe you have some air into your brakes, so you have to basically I don't know how to say it in English, but yeah, you just have to go and get rid of the air from the fluid, you know, and or you have to change your pads possibly. Maybe you have to change your discs. Or maybe you just have to put brand new tires, and when you get on new tires, you'll be able to brake later. But just make sure everything is spot on. That's why obviously racing is quite expensive for at high level. You know, when you're racing WSK in Europe or CIK FIA races, because you always need to be on point with everything, so that in order to maximize the performance on the track. All right. So I hope these were helpful. If you got any questions, just let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to help.